Imagine waking up in the heart of the Roman Empire. Marble roads shimmer under the sun, grand statues tower over crowded forums, and temples rise like promises of eternity. From a distance, it looks like perfection, discipline, glory, order. But for the ordinary Roman, especially those in the humiliores class, life was anything but golden. Beneath the empire's brilliance lurked a city choking on its own power. In the damp, crumbling insulae, the apartment blocks of the poor, disease spread faster than gossip, fires consumed entire neighborhoods, and crime hid in every shadow. Hunger was constant, fear was routine. By around AD 250, everything began to unravel. Historians call it the crisis of the 3rd century, a time when emperors rose and fell faster than the seasons, when Rome's legions turned their swords against one another, and when chaos became the empire's new ruler. Trade collapsed, borders cracked, farmers fled their fields or were dragged into endless wars. Even bread, the simplest food of all, became a treasure. A daily reminder that in ancient Rome, survival wasn't a birthright, it was a miracle. Social class, floor by floor. In the towering insulae, your social rank was measured not by what you owned, but by how high you had to climb. The lower floors were solid and safe, built of brick, sometimes with windows that caught a little sunlight. Those who lived here could afford a sliver of comfort, maybe a water jug, a wooden bed, a small hearth. They rented from shrewd landlords and looked down on the chaos below. Their rooms smelled faintly of bread, oil, and wine, the scene of survival with dignity. But the upper floors told another story. The higher you lived, the poorer you were. You climbed endless flights of creaking stairs to reach airless rooms where walls sweated with damp. There were no kitchens, no toilets, only shared latrines that overflowed and buckets emptied into the street below. In summer, heat gathered under the roof like punishment. In winter, the wind tore through the cracks, numbing fingers and freezing sleep. Families of 5, 6, sometimes 10 shared a single dark room. They ate cold porridge, wrapped themselves in rags, and prayed that the ceiling wouldn't collapse or a fire wouldn't start below. For them, life in the insulae wasn't about living well, it was about not dying tonight. Even Cicero, one of Rome's great statesmen, mocked these fragile towers. My buildings collapse so fast that even the rats cannot keep up with my moving pace. And still, more people came. Desperate farmers, freed slaves, laborers chasing hope in the city of marble. They filled every room, every hallway, every rooftop shack, until the insulae groaned under the weight of Rome's forgotten millions. Fire, the daily disaster waiting to happen. In Rome, fire was almost a matter of fate. Dry wood, cramped streets, open oil lamps. Disaster wasn't a possibility, it was inevitable. Officially, cooking inside the insulae was forbidden, but most people weren't rich enough to buy food outside. So they did what they had to do. They lit fires in their rooms. And one overturned oil lamp could destroy an attic, devour an entire building, engulf whole neighborhoods. Rome did have a fire brigade, the vigils, but more often than that, not they demanded bribes. They fought fires only if paid. So if your home caught fire and you had no money, your house was gone, your belongings were gone, and no one came to help. After the flames. When the smoke finally cleared, the city reeked of charred wood, burned flesh, and wet ash. Families who'd lost everything crowded in the temples, bedhouses, or even the open streets, clutching whatever scraps they saved from the fire. No insurance, no rebuilding fund, no pity. Landlords rebuilt quickly, not with care, but with the same cheap materials, rushing to rent out rooms again before the embers cooled. It was a cycle without end: fire, ruin, rebuild, repeat. For many Romans, the smell of smoke wasn't a warning, it was part of daily life. A reminder that survival in Rome meant sleeping every night under the tread of flames. Crime, filth, and the darkness of the streets. By day, Rome's streets roared with merchants, beggars, and the endless clatter of carts. But when night fell, the city transformed. The marble capital of the world became a labyrinth of shadows. No torches, no guards, no safety. Only whispers, footsteps, and fear. The Roman night belonged to no one, and to everyone who dared to take it. Thieves, gamblers, debt collectors, and deserters moved like ghosts through alleys barely wide enough for a single man. A stumble in the dark could mean a hand at your throat, or worse, a knife in your ribs. The streets themselves were a living hazard. Without sewage systems in the crowded districts, filth and waste clogged every corner. Buckets of excrement, spoiled food, and animal remains were tossed straight from upper windows. You didn't just walk carefully, you walked defensively, head down, cloak drawn. The poet Juvenal warned with bitter humor. If you walk out at night, pray there is no chamber pot falling from above, for he who hasn't written his will before dinner is a fool. He wasn't exaggerating. People died from falling debris, roof tiles, pots, even human waste. And when the heat of the day met the rot of the streets, the smell of the city itself became a threat. Every corner held a story of desperation. A starving child stealing bread, a runaway slave hiding in doorways, a drunk soldier gambling away his pay before sunrise, and behind them all, the gangs. Rome's underworld was a kingdom of its own. They called themselves the collegia, supposedly trade groups, but in truth, criminal brotherhoods that ruled entire neighborhoods. They collected protection money, settled disputes, and made sure the poor stayed afraid. If you crossed them, the Tiber would swallow your body by morning. The government's answer was the vigilance, a mix between night watchmen and firemen, but they were few, poorly paid, and easily bribed. They patrolled only the wealthier districts, where senators and merchants slept soundly behind locked gates. Everywhere else, law was an illusion. Justice belonged to those who could afford it. The rest had nothing, no protection, no recourse, not even light. In the world's greatest city, darkness itself was the most loyal citizen. The normalization of street violence. Night in Rome didn't belong only to thieves and beggars. It was also a playground for the powerful. When the wealthy ventured out after dark, they rarely walked alone. Bodyguards, servants, and hangers-on surrounded them, not for safety, but for spectacle. They roamed the streets like small armies, drunk on wine and privilege, and for the entertainment, they turned their gaze on the poor. A wrong look, a slow step, a nervous glance, any of these could invite mockery, a beating, or worse. The violence wasn't random, it was performative, a show of class supremacy. The historian Suetonius tells a chilling tale of Emperor Nero himself. Disguised under a hat and wig, he would wander the city at night, pretending to be a nobleman. With his companions, he ambushed innocent citizens, beating them senseless, stealing their goods, and tossing those who fought back into the city's reeking sewers. For ordinary Romans, a single wrong turn could decide their fate. A whisper, a stumble, or a laugh at the wrong moment could draw the wrath of someone untouchable. In the empire's capital, status was armor. Without it, you were fair game. The fragile and indifferent law enforcement. Rome did have a night force, the Vigilists. In theory, they were guardians of the city, night watchmen, firefighters, public order enforcers. In reality, they were undermanned, underpaid, and overwhelmed. The city's population was enormous, over 1 million souls, and the vigils were too few to control even a fraction of it. Bribes, fear, and exhaustion dulled their sense of duty. They feared the gangs, respected the rich, and ignored the rest. When a poor citizen screamed for help, their voice vanished into the night. But when flames lit up the sky, the vigils suddenly came alive. Not out of compassion, but out of fear. Because in Rome, fire didn't care who you were. It could swallow palaces and slums alike. And that, more than justice or mercy, was what kept the vigils awake at night. Hygiene, health, and the battle against disease. Rome was a city of contradictions, a masterpiece built on rot. It boasted one of the most advanced infrastructures the ancient world had ever seen. Aqueducts carried water from distant hills, fountains sparkled in public squares, and the great baths echoed with laughter, gossip, and the splash of marble pools. Beneath it all, the Cloaca Maxima, Rome's mighty sewer, swept away the waste of an empire. To any outsider, it looked like a triumph of civilization, a city washed clean by engineering genius. But beneath that illusion lay a harsher truth. Rome was overcrowded beyond imagination. Nearly 1 million people pressed into a maze of narrow streets and fragile insulae. Germs, bacteria, and contagion were concepts unknown to Roman science. Cleanliness was measured not by hygiene, but by smell. If it didn't stink, it must be safe, or so people believed. The wealthy enjoyed private baths, perfumed oils, and fresh water brought directly to their homes. But for the poor, even clean water was a luxury. Most fetched it from public fountains shared by thousands, often beside open drains and piles of garbage. Children play near runoff from the sewers, and animals, dogs, rats, donkeys, drank from the same puddles. In truth, Rome's magnificent sewage system didn't remove filth. It merely relocated it. The Cloaca Maxima carried away the waste, but the Tiber River received it all, turning the city's lifeline into its poison. When summer came and the heat rose, the stench became unbearable, and diseases spread through the slums like fire through dry wood. Typhoid, dysentery, malaria, plague, all found perfect shelter in the empire's heart. Rome's marvel of plumbing and power was, in the end, a beautiful mask for a dying body. A city that had mastered stone and water, but never learned how to fight what it couldn't see. Public latrines and unsanitary practices. Even something as ordinary as using the bathroom could be a dangerous adventure in ancient Rome. Public latrines were long benches of cold marble, lined with side-by-side holes, no walls, no stalls. Privacy didn't exist. Talking to the person next to you, or even sealing a business deal mid-defecation, was completely normal. People debated politics, drank wine, and shared gossip while seated elbow to elbow, surrounded by the echoes of splashing water and worse. Some latrine walls carried carved prayers to Fortuna, the goddess of luck. Even the Romans understood that in this city, bad fortune could strike anywhere, even here. The perils of the latrine. For many, the latrine wasn't just filthy, it was deadly. The city's sewers carried more than waste. They were filled with methane and sulfur gases, trapped beneath the streets in an unstable single-channel system. One spark, a dropped lamp, a candle, or even static from friction could trigger an explosion, sending flames roaring up through the toilet seats. The sewers also teemed with rats and vermin. There are chilling accounts of rats crawling up through the latrine holes, biting unsuspecting citizens in the dark. So when Romans carved prayers on the walls, they weren't poetic, they were plays of survival. Personal hygiene, the tersorium, the shared sponge. To modernize, this may be the most disturbing part of Roman hygiene. There was no toilet paper. Instead, Romans used the tersorium, a stick tipped with a sea sponge. After use, the sponge was rinsed in a communal bucket filled with salt water or vinegar, and then reused by the next person. Everyone, from merchants to slaves, shared the same few sponges. This practice turned the humble tersorium into a breeding ground for disease. Intestinal parasites, dysentery, and cholera-like infections spread easily through the shared water bucket. In a sense, the Romans unknowingly created a single, shared bacterial ecosystem, a literal pool of humanity. Urine in daily life, from waste to resource. To the Romans, urine wasn't waste, it was opportunity. They used it for cleaning, bleaching, and even personal care. Teeth whitening. Its ammonia content was believed to brighten teeth. Romans rinsed their mouths with it. Laundry. Professional launderers, called flons, stomped on clothes soaked in urine vats, believing it removed stains and made fabric whiter. By midday, the Forum Romanum and surrounding streets smelled like one vast public toilet. In summer, the air itself seemed to curdle. The practice was so profitable that Emperor Vespasian taxed public urinals, the infamous vectigal urinea. When his son Titus recoiled at the idea, calling it disgusting, Vespasian held up a coin and said, "Pecunia non olet." Money does not stink. Baths, therma, and the spread of disease. To the Romans, bathing wasn't a luxury, it was a ritual. The thermae were vast temples of steam and stone, where citizens came not only to clean themselves, but to exercise, dine, flirt, gossip, and negotiate business deals. Some Romans even visited 3 times a day, morning, noon, and night. To outsiders, this daily devotion to bathing looked like a triumph of hygiene, but in truth, it was a ritual of shared contamination. Oil instead of soap, the great hygiene misconception. Romans didn't use soap. Instead, they coated themselves with scented olive oil, letting it mingle with sweat, dust, and grime. Then came the strigil, a curved metal scraper used to remove the mixture of oil and filth from the skin. The method seemed effective, elegant even, but there was a hidden cost. Strigils were shared. The scraping opened tiny cuts and scratches, and with them came the perfect invitation for blood-borne disease. Every bather left a trace of themselves on the next. Modern science tells us what the Romans didn't know. Their daily cleansing ritual was actually a mass exchange of microbes. The baths didn't purify, they spread. Shared items, a hotbed for germs. A Roman bath wasn't just a public spa, it was a living laboratory of infection. The strigil passed from hand to hand, scraped thousands of bodies. Towels, sponges, and oil jars were communal property. The same cloth that dried one man's back might be used moments later on another's face. Even the scented oils, meant to perfume and pamper, become breeding grounds for bacteria and fungus contaminated by fingers, sweat, and air. By modern terms, stepping into the baths was like stepping into a petri dish. Romans left the Thermae feeling refreshed, but they carried with them the DNA of thousands of strangers. In a city of 1 million people, the baths weren't just centers of leisure, they were super spreaders of the ancient world. Pools, hot water, hotter germs. The heart of every bathhouse was its pools, the tepidarium with its warm embrace and the caldarium thick with steam. But beneath the glitter of the water, a deadly ecosystem thrived. There were no filters, no drainage, no chlorine. The same water was used day after day, absorbing oil, sweat, blood, and dust from countless bodies. The warmth turned these pools into ideal incubators for infection. Tuberculosis, bacteria, fungal spores, intestinal microbes, parasites. The Romans believed the heat purified the body. In reality, it fed the invisible world that was devouring them. In chasing pleasure and luxury, they built one of history's earliest and most elegant disease factories. Rome's beauty culture, the real purpose of fragrance. The Romans were never chasing cleanliness, they were chasing illusion. After leaving the public baths, their skin glistened not from freshness, but from layers of unguenta, the thick fragrant oils rubbed across the body like armor against odor. It wasn't cleansing, it was concealment. Sweat, dirt, and decay simply traded one sin for another. The city itself was a storm of smells. Olive oil, burning wood, cooked meat, sewage, and smoke all tangled together into the chaotic perfume of Rome. What we now call Mediterranean charm was in truth the desperate fight against the stink of empire. Under the marble domes of the baths, hundreds shared the same pools, oils, and strigils. The air shimmered with steam, gossip, and germs. Romans prided themselves on their hygiene, yet beneath the veneer of polished stone, the empire was rotting, a civilization wrapped in fragrance but drenched in filth. Rome was not clean, it was collectively perfumed decay. Epidemics and medical helplessness. Even Rome's greatest marvels could not protect it from what the eye could not see. The Cloacae Maxima, the empire's mighty sewer, flowed like a vein through the capital, yet the streets still festered with rot. Animal carcasses lay beside vegetable scraps, and the runoff of human waste pooled in alleys under the beating sun. The Roman crowd, tens of thousands crushed into dense tenement blocks, shared air, water, and disease. Public fountains that glittered in marble masks became the empire's unseen killers. Archaeologists later uncovered fossilized parasite eggs in Roman latrines, roundworms, whipworms, tapeworms, silent companions of daily life. Each shared sponge, each communal seed, each splash of unfiltered water spread invisible armies of sickness. The city was a living organism, but its bloodstream was infection. The plague of Cyprian, AD 250 to 270, the dark waves that brought the empire to its knees. Then death arrived, unstoppable, invisible, and without mercy. It began with fever, then vomiting, then bleeding. Bishop Cyprian wrote that blood poured from the eyes and intestines as if the body were melting from within. No one knew what the plague was. Historians still debate. Ebola? Smallpox? Something lost to time? Whatever it was, it shattered the empire. In Rome, 5,000 people died every day. Entire families vanished overnight. In Alexandria, 60% of the population disappeared. The army collapsed, farmers fled their fields, the imperial court became a carousel of death, emperors dying faster than they could be crowned. The empire didn't just weaken, its beacon, it drowned in its own breath. For a civilization obsessed with order, this was chaos incarnate. The gods had turned their faces away. Rome's marble glories meant nothing against the stench of disease. Medicine in ancient Rome, balancing the bodily fluids. To a Roman, sickness was not caused by germs, it was caused by imbalance. Four fluids governed the body: blood, phlegm, yellow bile, and black bile. To heal meant to restore balance by any means necessary. If you had a fever, they bled you. If you had nausea, they forced you to vomit. If you had pain, they purged your bowels with bitter herbs. A Roman patient didn't walk into a clinic. He entered a battlefield. Bronze scalpels gleamed beside bone hooks and forceps. Each instrument was designed to cut, tear, and drain. There was no anesthesia. Pain was not something to avoid, it was part of the cure. The surgeon's knife sank and the patient screamed. In rare cases, opium dulled the agony. Wine numbed the soul, but most relied on prayer. The gods Apollo, Asclepius, Hygiene were invoked more than medicine ever was. Because in Rome, healing was faith disguised as science. Roman surgery and superstition, the theater of pain. A Roman surgery was not a place of comfort, it was the theater of endurance. The surgeon entered like a priest, surrounded by tools that gleamed into torchlight. No gloves, no washing, no understanding that every blade carried death unseen. Assistants held the patient down. The cut was swift or not. Blood spilled freely. Flesh was burned to stop the bleeding. The stench of scorched skin filled the air. If the patient lived, it was divine mercy. If he died, it was divine judgment. Superstition ruled medicine as much as knowledge. Surgeons muttered charms, hung amulets over wounds, and timed operations to the phases of the moon. The boundary between doctor and sorcerer blurred. Even the greatest minds, Galen, Celsus, Cicrobonius, guessed more than they knew. They carved animals open, hoping to see what made humans live. They charted the stars to explain infection. They believed the universe itself bled like the human body. And yet, for all its pain and ignorance, Roman medicine endured. Not because it healed, but because it reflected the Roman soul, disciplined, unyielding, unafraid of suffering. Pain was proof of strength. Endurance was proof of virtue. To suffer was to live as a Roman. In the end, Rome was never clean, never safe, never healed. It was an empire that masked decay with oil, disguised disease with prayer, and called pain a form of honor. For all its grandeur, the truth was simple. Rome didn't conquer the world through purity. It survived through pain. Food, economy, and daily toil, the price of survival in Rome. The illusion of Roman luxury. Rome dazzled the world. Marble villas, glittering banquets, wine poured from golden cups. But this glitter was only the thin surface of a deep abyss. Behind every feast lay 1,000 hungry faces pressed against the city's walls, watching, waiting, surviving. For the patricians, life was a theater of excess. Peacocks roasted whole, honey-soaked dormice, oysters from distant shores. For everyone else, life was repetition, hunger, fatigue, and the dull ache of endurance. The city's true heartbeat wasn't in the palaces. It pulsed in the slums, in the crowded insulae where thousands lived stacked upon each other in darkness and damp. The scent of luxury never reached them, only the smell of sweat, smoke, and bread that was mostly dust. Rome was a tale told in opposites, wealth beyond imagination, poverty beyond words. The meager diet of the poor. For most Romans, eating wasn't pleasure, it was survival. Morning began with stale barley bread dipped in watered wine. Clean water was rare, wine diluted the danger. There was no coffee, no milk, no fruit, just a bitter mouthful to wake the body enough for work. Dinner, the only real meal, was pose, a thick porridge of boiled grains or lentils. Day after day, the same bowl. No meat, no fish, no vegetables unless one was lucky enough to steal or barter. To flavor the monotony, they used garum, a fermented fish sauce whose smell alone could empty a room today, yet in Rome it was gold. The poor were not underfed, they were malnourished. Children grew short and frail, adults aged young, teeth rotted, bones weakened, skin dulled. Hunger became an identity. In Rome, even the act of eating was a reminder of where you stood. Economic collapse and inflation. Rome's economy was built on conquest, plunder, tribute, and slaves. As long as the legions marched, wealth flowed. But when the war stopped, so did the silver. Desperate to buy loyalty, emperors minted new coins with less and less precious metal. They gleamed, but their worth faded. A coin that once bought a loaf of bread could now buy only crumbs. People whispered in the markets, money is no longer money. The price of oil, wine, and grain soared. Mothers lined up for state bread rations, praying there would be enough before the carts ran empty. The poor sold their clothes, tools, even their children into servitude just to eat another day. Rome's glory was collapsing under the weight of its own hunger. The empire had conquered the world, but it could no longer feed its own. Life of labor, living on the edge of the body. For the lower classes, the body was the only tool they owned, and the only one they could not afford to break. Dock workers hauled amphora until their backs bent permanently. Masons and porters lifted stones heavier than themselves. Street sweepers inhaled dust and ash until their lungs turned to sand. Every day began with exhaustion and ended in pain. Wages barely covered food for a day. There were no savings, no safety nets. If the foreman didn't call your name at dawn, no work, no coin, no meal. Slaves endured wars. They were not paid, only used. A cracked hand or a broken leg meant disposal, not recovery. In mines and quarries, slaves vanished into darkness, crushed by stone or suffocated by dust, unseen by the world above. Every monument of Rome, every temple, every triumphal arch was a graveyard of unseen bodies. The empire's greatness stood on trembling legs, blistered hands, and broken spines. Harsh working conditions. Before the sun rose, the workers of Rome were already awake. The city was still a silhouette of domes and smoke when men and women shuffled toward the docks, markets, and construction yards. Tools were crude: hammers, chisels, ropes, nothing to protect, everything to wound. Sandals slipped on wet marble, fires burned without warning, carts overturned. A single mistake could cost a hand, an eye, a life. There were no doctors for the poor, no compensation, no mercy. An injury meant starvation. Pain wasn't treated, it was ignored. In the evenings, the same exhausted bodies trudged home through narrow alleys, past feasts they would never taste, their faces lit by torches from homes that weren't theirs. They slept in rooms so small that even dreams had no space to stretch. Epilogue: The Price of Greatness. Rome was called the Eternal City, but for most, eternity meant enduring one more day. While senators debated philosophy and poets recited under marble arches, millions labored, sweated, and starved so that the illusion of empire could gleam. The stones of Rome still stand today, but if you listen closely, they whisper not of glory, but of hunger. Every empire is built on bodies. Rome's were simply never counted. The double burden of woman. In the heart of the empire, women carried Rome on their backs, silently, endlessly. They sold figs and olives in the markets, bargained for grain, spun thread, and wove the tunics that clothed entire families. In dim courtyards, they worked the loom by day and mended garments by candlelight at night. Their hands were rough, their shoulders stooped, their eyes tired before 40. But their labor didn't end when the market stalls closed. At home, they became cooks, cleaners, nurses, and mothers, feeding mouths that never stopped kneading. They washed, baked, fetched water, soothed crying infants, and tended to the sick, all while keeping the fragile rhythm of daily survival intact. Each childbirth was a journey to the edge of death. No antiseptics, no trained doctors, only midwives, whispered prayers, and hope. Every birth was a coin toss between life and the grave. Some women survived to bury their own children, others died bringing new life into the world. And yet, the next morning, the city still demanded bread, clothes, and care. Rome's women rose again because no one else would. They were the invisible spine of the empire, bending but never breaking. The unseen cost of Rome's grandeur. When the torches dimmed and the city sank into sleep, the true Rome revealed itself, tired, scared, and aching. Workers limped home through alleyways slick with dust and sweat. Women nursed blistered hands by faint firelight. The hum of the city quieted, but the pain never did. There was no rest, only a pause before dawn's return. The same stone roads that led generals to triumph were paved by those who never tasted victory. The same marble that adorned palaces was lifted by backs that would never stand straight again. Rome's splendor was real, its cost even more so. Every column, every arch, every triumphal gate was built upon exhaustion. The empire's immortality was carved from mortal suffering. And when morning came, they rose again. To build, to carry, to clean, to feed, so that Rome could shine one more day. Justice and merciless punishments. The law of Rome written in blood. To the modern eye, Rome's justice system might appear orderly, scrolls of laws, marble courts, and advocates in spotless togas. But beneath the columns and rhetoric lay a system ruled by hierarchy, cruelty, and spectacle. Justice in Rome was never blind. It could see wealth, class, and bloodlines all too clearly. Class divisions and the courtroom. The Roman citizenry was divided into honestorios, the privileged senators, generals, and landowners, humiliores, the poor, laborers, slaves, and the forgotten. For the honestiores, A trial could mean negotiation, fines, or exile. For the humiliores, it meant humiliation, pain, or death. Courtrooms were public theaters. The accused stood before a sneering crowd, their fate decided not by evidence but by birth. A wealthy man caught stealing could buy his way out. A poor man caught stealing bread could be whipped until the skin tore from his back. The Roman courtroom was less a place of justice than a mirror of power. The marble floors gleamed. The judge spoke of order, but the message was simple. The rich ruled, the poor obeyed. Merciless punishments for the humiliores. If you were poor, punishment was not correction, it was annihilation. Public floggings painted the streets red. Men were tied to posts, beaten until they collapsed, while children were forced to watch and learn. The prisons were underground tombs, stone walls slick with rot, air thick with disease. There were no trials of rehabilitation, only decay. Many prisoners starved before they ever faced a judge. Executions became civic rituals. Some were stoned to death in marketplaces, others nailed to crosses along roads, silent warnings for miles. The message was clear. Rome's peace was kept through pain. Meanwhile, the elite drank wine in their villas, their justice paid for in silver, not blood. Death and labor, the cruel punishments of Rome. Rome's punishments were not only meant to end life, they were meant to prolong terror. Damnatio in metella, condemnation to the mines, was among the cruelest. Convicts, slaves, and rebels were sent deep underground, where no sunlight reached, forced to dig metal that funded the empire that had erased them. They worked until their lungs filled with dust, their bones shattered, and their bodies gave out. They died standing, pickaxe still in hand. For graver crimes, there was crucifixion, burning, impalement, or being thrown from the Tarpeian rock. And for the unforgivable parasite, there was poena culei, the condemned sewn into a sack with a monkey, a snake, a rooster, and a dog, then thrown into the Tiber. The symbolism was grotesque, cut off from both humankind and beast, erased from every order of existence. Torture was routine, a sanctioned method of extracting truth. Slaves could be beaten until confession. Innocence was a luxury of the freeborn. Justice in Rome did not seek fairness, it sought obedience through fear. Blood and spectacle, the gladiator arenas. Nowhere was Roman justice more visible than in the arena, where death itself was entertainment. For the poor, the condemned, and the enslaved, the arena was the final destination. Criminals, debtors, and rebels were sent to die for the amusement of those who ruled them. The sand of the Colosseum was soaked with blood long before the crowd's first cheer. Damnatio ad gladium, death by the sword. Those condemned ad gladium fought armed gladiators with little protection. They were thrown into the arena with dull blades, broken shields, and no hope. A single misstep meant instant death, a spectacle for thousands. Seneca, who once watched these killings, wrote, "There is no mercy, no respite, it's pure slaughter." Each swing of the sword was not just punishment, it was propaganda. Rome reminded its people that mercy was a privilege, not a right. Damnatio ad basties, thrown to the beasts. At dawn, the condemned faced lions, leopards, and wolves imported from the far reaches of the empire. The gates opened, the beasts charged, and screams drowned under the roar of the crowd. Sometimes the animals were starved to heighten the frenzy, sometimes they were burned or wounded to enrage them further. The arena became a moral stage. The crowd saw not criminals but examples. Each death was a performance of control, proof that the empire's grip extended over body and soul. The harsh reality of survival in the arena. For those forced to fight, survival required more than strength. It demanded numbness. The air reeked of sweat and fear. The crowd's roar was both intoxicating and terrifying. Each fighter stood between two fates: die quickly and be forgotten, or survive another day in a living nightmare. A few rare victors, the spared, were paraded like trophies, their lives extended only because the audience demanded another show. Most never left the arena alive. For the masses, these scenes were lessons written in blood. To live in Rome was to live under constant warning. Disobey and the arena awaits. A society built on fear. In Rome, justice was not a shield, it was a weapon. The laws were written in ink, but enforced in pain. The empire's order depended on the humiliation of the powerless and the performance of cruelty. Every lash, every scream, every public execution whispered the same truth. Power was not just held, it was displayed. For the humiliores, justice meant submission. For the empire, cruelty meant control. And for the crowd, it was all just another day's entertainment. Social structure and religious pressure. You wake before dawn as the city stirs beneath a sky still heavy with smoke and silence. In Rome, faith is not a matter of the soul, it's a matter of survival. Every prayer, every gesture, every word must be correct, precise, rehearsed. There is no room for hesitation. There is no space for disbelief. The flicker of your household lamp casts long shadows across the walls, and you whisper a greeting to the gods who guard your doorway. Cardia for the hinges, Limontinus for the threshold, Vesta for the heart. You offer a pinch of salt, a drop of wine, and the hope that no one saw you falter. Because even the smallest mistake, an offering spilled, a name mispronounced, can turn a neighbor's misfortune into your fault. The gods' endless gaze. The Romans live beneath a sky crowded with eyes. Every stone, every flame, every gust of wind belongs to a god watching, listening, waiting to be acknowledged. To skip a ritual is to invite disaster. To perform one incorrectly is to summon suspicion. Misfortune never strikes by chance. It is blamed, assigned, explained through divine anger. In the narrow streets, shrines bloom like wildflowers. Smoke from sacrifices curls above rooftops, thick with the scent of ash and blood. Children learn early to bow before every statue, to toss a coin at every altar. Religion is not belief, it is reflex. Rome's gods are not merciful, they are administrators of fear. The emperor as a living god. By mid-morning, the city trembles with noise. The emperor's likeness approaches in a golden procession, flanked by soldiers, banners, and the chanting of priests. You kneel with the crowd, head bowed low, the hot dust clinging to your skin. To fail to bow is treason. To look away is rebellion. You force the words of praise through your teeth, the smell of incense burning your throat. You don't believe he is divine, but that doesn't matter. In Rome, belief is irrelevant. Obedience is everything. When the horns fade, you remain on your knees until you are certain that the image is gone. The man beside you who hesitated, who blinked instead of bowing, will not be seen again. The message is clear. Worship is not devotion, it is survival. The patron's power. You make your way through the forum toward the grand house of your patron. Each morning brings the same ritual, as sacred as any temple prayer. You wait among a line of clients, poor men like you, rehearsing your words. When it's your turn, you bow low and compliment the cut of his toga, his noble posture, his divine judgment. In return, he offers a few bronze coins, your bread for the day. You smile, thank him profusely, and back away without turning your back on him. One wrong word, one misplaced jest, and the door will close forever. Patronage binds Rome tighter than chains. The rich protect the poor, but only as long as they are flattered. It is not loyalty that keeps this city upright, it is fear wrapped in courtesy. The shadow of slavery. Down in the alleys, the clatter of chains reminds you of another truth. Slaves carry water, sweep the marble floors, grind the grain that feeds the empire. Their eyes are hollow, their backs raw. They have no gods of their own, no patrons, no rights. When a master dies by violence, every slave in his household dies with him, purified for a crime they didn't commit. Rome calls it justice, Rome calls it order. And yet, some save coins for years, hoping to buy their freedom. Manumission, they call it, a rebirth into half-liberty. But even then, the freedman remains bound to his old master, now as a client, forever owing service and respect. In Rome, even freedom has a leash. A city of ritual and fear. Night descends and you light your lamp again, watching its flame shiver against the walls. The day has passed in constant performance, kneeling, praising, obeying, pretending. You're exhausted, not from labor, but from vigilance. You whisper to the household spirits, your voice trembling with habit. The city outside hums with the same exhausted devotion. Priests chanting, coins clinking, distant drums marking another sacrifice. In this world, fate is not comfort, it is control. The gods, the emperor, the patrons, they do not protect, they command. And so you bow again and again, not because you believe, but because you must. Because in Rome, survival means surrender. You close your eyes and realize you wouldn't survive a day in the Roman Empire. Polytheism and ritual. You wake to the scent of smoke and oil. Outside, the city is already whispering its prayers. Somewhere, a priest chants to Jupiter, his voice echoing between marble walls. Somewhere else, a mother sprinkles wine onto her doorstep for the household gods. In Rome, worship isn't a choice, it's the pulse of existence. Every act, no matter how small, is sacred. You whisper to Cardia as you open your door, to Limentinius as you step across the threshold, and to Vesta as you light the morning flame. You don't remember when this began, you only know that to forget would be madness. Every hinge, every shadow, every gust of wind belongs to a god. The city breathes under their eyes. Skip a ritual and people notice. A child falls ill, a neighbor's wall collapses, the Tiber overflows, and suddenly all eyes turn toward you. He forgot to honor Mercury, they murmur. She angered the Lares. Guilt in Rome doesn't need proof, it needs only rumor. The gods are everywhere, and they are never kind. They do not forgive forgetfulness, nor tolerate delay. Every morning, incense burns from hundreds of doorways, a curtain of smoke rising toward the sky thick with unseen eyes. Even the stones seem alive, ancient and watching. The foundation of your home, the road beneath your feet, the fountain's edge, all are sacred, all are fragile. You live in a city of altars, on every corner a shrine, in every home a fire. The air hums with whispered names: Venus, Mars, Janus, Fortuna, Ceres, each demanding attention, each promising ruin if ignored. You feel their gaze when you walk, when you eat, when you breathe. And yet, amid the noise of prayers and the endless rituals, you realize something terrifying. You are not worshipping to find peace, you are worshipping to survive. In Rome, piety is not faith, it's insurance. And every forgotten offering is a death sentence waiting to happen. The patronage system. The sun hasn't yet reached the marble roofs when the lower city begins to stir. Sandals scrape the cobblestones as men in worn tunics hurry through narrow streets, clutching small gifts, figs, bread, flowers, tokens of respect for the men who own their faiths. At the Domus gate, the line forms. Dozens wait in silence, each face rehearsing a smile, each mouth preparing words of flattery. This is the salutatio, the morning ritual of survival. You bow before your patron, a wealthy senator draped in spotless white. You praise the shine of his sandals, the grace of his speech, the fairness of his rule. He nods, bored, and presses a single bronze coin into your hand. You bow again. That coin will feed your family for one day. Your dignity will not. But you don't dare to show resentment. One misplaced word, one hint of irritation, and the door will close tomorrow. Without your patron's protection, you are invisible. Prey to debt collectors, thieves, and the city's endless hunger. Rome is not sustained by marble or law. It is built on flattery. Every compliment is a brick, every bow a sacrifice, and you keep smiling because that's what obedience requires. Slavery and freedom. Beyond the forum, the slaves begin their day long before dawn. Their footsteps echo through corridors as they sweep, polish, and carry water until their arms ache. They are the invisible machinery that keeps the empire turning. To the Romans, a slave is not a person. He is a possession, a living tool. When a master dies by violence, the punishment is swift and absolute. Every slave in the household is executed, whether they lifted the blade or not. Justice in Rome doesn't seek truth, it seeks control. And yet, within this cage, a cruel hope persists. Some slaves save coins, hoarded secretly from tips or mercy payments, dreaming of manumission, the moment of being freed. But freedom in Rome is never truly free. The newly liberated become freedmen, forever tied to their former masters as clients, bound by obligation, loyalty, and fear. They walk the city with a new name, but the same burden. Freedom here is only another form of service, painted in gold instead of chains. The perpetual grip of social pressure. Rome breathes through ritual, hierarchy, and fear. Every morning demands the same script. Bow to the gods, praise the emperor, flatter the powerful. Remember your place. For the poor, every day is a performance, one mistake away from ruin. Religion dictates your gestures, the emperor dictates your loyalty, your patron dictates your survival. It's a world where every smile hides exhaustion and every prayer hides fear. The gods watch from their altars, the masters watch from their villas. The city itself seems to watch, judging who kneels deeply enough, who flatters loudly enough, who obeys without question. You live with the constant weight of being seen. Every glance could condemn you. Every silence could destroy you. The empire's great weapon is not the sword, it is order. Every Roman knows their place, and every stitch of clothing, every word, every glance must prove it. Here, hierarchy is not an idea, it's a daily performance. Status symbols and clothing laws. You see him before you smell the perfume. A senator draped in deep purple. The crowd parts instinctively. No one dares brush against him. The stripe of Tyrian dye along his toga burns like a warning. That purple, worth its weight in gold, comes from thousands of crushed sea snails. Only the powerful may wear it. The rest of you must settle for dull white or brown. To wear what you are not entitled to is to court disaster. You pass a young man once caught wearing a purple border he couldn't afford. The dye has faded from his tunic, but not from his scars. In Rome, clothing is law. You dress not for comfort, not for beauty, but to declare your rank, to remind everyone and yourself of what you are not. Childhood and early responsibilities. For the poor, childhood is short. At 8, you carry jugs of water from the fountain. At 10, you sweep the stalls in the market. By 12, you are no longer a child, you are a labor. The streets of Rome echo with small footsteps and tired voices. Children howl sacks of grain twice their size, their hands blistered, their backs already bent. They laugh sometimes, but the laughter sounds rehearsed, like they have seen adults do it and are imitating the sound. Education is for the sons of the rich, their days filled with tutors, scrolls, and polished wax tablets. For you, the only lessons are obedience and endurance. By the time you can read, you have already learned the more important truth. In Rome, you must work to be seen and bow to be safe. Some nights, as you walk home, you hear them, the faint cries from the alleys near the steps of the temples, newborns, abandoned, unwanted, left to fate. It happens more than anyone admits. A daughter when a son was needed, a mouth too many to feed. The baby is left wrapped in cloth under the indifferent stars. Sometimes a passerby takes them, perhaps out of pity, perhaps for profit. Those who leave are raised as slaves, their first breath marking them as property. And so the cycle continues. The poor bird servants, the rich purchase them, and Rome keeps turning. Social surveillance and psychological pressure. Even when you do nothing wrong, you are watched. Your clothing, your posture, the way you speak, everything reveals who you are. Every marketplace, every forum, every temple is filled with invisible eyes, measuring worth, noting mistakes. The laws of class are unwritten in some places, but everyone knows them. A humble man must not look too long at a noble woman. A freedman must step aside for a citizen. A slave must never meet the gaze of his master. And children grow up watching, learning, shrinking. They see their parents bow and they understand. Survival depends on silence. It's a city ruled by mirrors and masks. You smile when spoken to, kneel when told, and pray not for freedom, but for permission to exist. Because in Rome, obedience is oxygen. Without it, you cannot breathe. At night, when the streets are quiet and the lamps flicker low, you think about all the rules, what you can wear, what you can say, how you must walk, when you must bow. You realize you never made a choice that was truly your own. The empire thrives on your fear, polished into discipline, wrapped in ritual. It is beautiful from a distance, a masterpiece of order carved from the chaos of millions of lives. But from where you stand, it feels like a cage. You lower your eyes, straighten your worn tunic, and whisper to yourself, you wouldn't survive a day in the Roman Empire. Fire and ashes, the fall of Rome. You wake to the smell of smoke, but this time it's not incense rising from the temples, it's the city itself burning. The marble walls glow orange, the air thick with ash. Somewhere in the distance, bells ring for order, but no one listens anymore. The empire that once claimed eternity has grown old, and it is dying the way it lived, loudly, beautifully, and full of denial. The gods are silent now. The altars stand cold. No one remembers which offering pleases whom. You walk through the streets that were once alive with laughter and trade. The fountains are dry, the forums echo with emptiness. Statues of emperors lie broken in the dust, their stone eyes staring at nothing. Armies march in confusion, banners torn, their royalty traded like coins. The Senate debates as if words could stop flames. Even the nobles hoard bread now, hiding behind their villa gates. The empire's gold is worthless, its gods are dead. The world that conquered continents can't even feed its own. The barbarians come not as monsters, but as mirrors, showing Rome the face it tried to forget. The people whisper that this is punishment, that Jupiter has turned away, that Rome has sinned. But the truth is simpler. The empire is not being punished, it is being repaid. For centuries, it has drained the poor, enslaved the weak, bled its citizens, and called the blood divine. Now the veins run dry. You see them in the streets, beggars, soldiers, slaves, all wearing the same dust, the same hunger, the same look of disbelief that the eternal city could ever die. The flames reach the forum, the bronze doors melt, and the temples collapse with a sound like thunder. You can feel the heat on your skin. You run, but there is nowhere left to go. A priest kneels in the ashes, his hands clasped around the statue's head, praying to a god who no longer answers. The sky turns black, the air is fire. The empire ends not with a cry, but with a sigh, as if even the earth is relieved. When the smoke clears, the world is quieter. Fields reclaim the marble. Vines crawl over the broken beds and fallen columns. The great roads that once led to glory now led to silence. But Rome does not vanish. It lingers, a ghost in every city that will follow, a warning carved into history that no civilization, no matter how divine it claims to be, can survive the weight of its own cruelty. The fire fades, the ash settles. You stand alone amid the ruins, and for the first time, there are no gods to fear, no masters to serve, no crowds to cheer. Only silence, and you finally understand you wouldn't survive a day in the Roman Empire.